You mentioned this current movement towards electrification and the like. Certainly, electric and hybrid vehicles are not a brand new thing, but we are in the midst of a new moment, a resurgence of interest in them. And you were one of the leaders in this charge, I think, of this modern move with your work. What led you into pursuing hybrids and the electric side of things?
So originally, when I started Fisker Automotive, I really just felt that this was the right time. And the reason was back in 2007, I just saw there was a lot of talk about, that was the first time I started feeling that the automobile was going to become the enemy of society. And I love cars so much. I can't imagine a world without cars. So I think I felt almost like obligated to figure out how can we keep the car amongst us as a personal, private means of transportation. That was the one side. And the other side, I was actually a little bit inspired when Leonardo DiCaprio drove in his Prius to the Oscars. And I thought, here's a guy, he can surely afford, a more expensive car than that, but he does want an environmental friendly car and he wants to make a statement about it. So I came up with the Fisker Karma, which were, our first plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, which, were the first luxury plug-in hybrid in the world. We launched in 2011. And it was actually about a year ahead of the Tesla Model S. Unfortunately, being the first, not always the best, because we had to deal with some very early suppliers that gave us a lot of difficulties, especially our battery supplier. But of course, Leonardo DiCaprio ended up buying the first Fisker Karma, which was very exciting. It was a very extreme design vehicle. We didn't hold back on anything. Beauty was number one because we really wanted to make a statement about the design of this vehicle, that it doesn't have to look awkward or dorky to drive an electric car. Now, in the meantime, moving fast forward to today, batteries, lithium-ion batteries are becoming a lot more common, a lot more proven technology. We have a lot of electric cars on the road today, but I'm proud of having kind of been part of the early pioneers of this, and we're obviously continuing now with developing a range of fully electric vehicles.
Okay, so beyond electrification, right, there's all kinds of talk about the future of the car. And as you mentioned, right, there's questions about continued interest in the car among the youth. I happen to work in a field that we interact with the youth and a lot, and I still see their eyes light up when they see a cool design in that. What's your take on all this chatter about anything from self-driving to, right, whatever not? Where do you see cars going?
Well, obviously, we are going to keep seeing a technology evolution and revolution in certain areas, and we have seen that throughout the history of cars. I think electrification is probably going to be the biggest disruptor to the established automotive world, because it's a fundamental rethink of how to develop a car, and it's a rethink of how to build a car. So that's a big revolution. When it comes to autonomous vehicles, there's so many levels of autonomy. And I think the fully autonomous, meaning level 5, fully autonomous without a steering wheel in any condition, anywhere, I think we're more than at least one car generation away from that. So that means more than 7 years away from that for sure, in my opinion. We may see some self-driving cars without a driver in certain conditions, in certain areas where it makes sense. And of course, one of the things that's happened in the last few years that may also have an impact on certain vehicles, or may even end up being developed specific vehicles for, is ride-hailing. So ride-hailing was a big disruptor that really took the occasional taxi to everybody and almost their personal private driver arriving wherever you wanted it. And obviously, it's very expensive to have a personal driver. It always was. And even Lyft and Uber, they have tried to make it more affordable, but it's still expensive. So, of course, eventually, if that gets into self-driving vehicles, what may happen there is there may be developed some specific vehicles for that, and that will have an impact on design for certain vehicles. However, I don't foresee the private automobile going away for a very, very long time. And the reason is that if you look back in history, the private transportation has always been a desire for the human being. It's always been part of how we as humans lived. It's always been part of what we aspire to. So even when you look way back, people aspire to own their own horse, to have their own horse. And it also even was important how fast that horse was, how good looking that horse was, what breed it was, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of evolved into the car. How fast is it? How good does it look? What brand is it? And I don't foresee that going away anytime soon. But what may change is the amount of private vehicles that is being sold every year and is being directly owned by somebody. And we have already seen that with the invention of the lease and with more financing available, the truth is that many people truly do not own their car. So many people either financing the vehicle or leasing the vehicle, which means the bank's actually owning it, but you're saying it's my vehicle. So we have, for instance, created a flexible lease where you can lease your vehicle, but you can give it back anytime. But the difference here is that it does feel like it's your vehicle because you may just keep it for 6 months or a year or 2 years, but it's your vehicle while you keep it. You choose the color, you choose the specs, it's your vehicle. And that's different from a car sharing where you randomly walk out in the street and pick up any car that happens to be the color it is not specification you necessarily want. So that's a whole different type of vehicle. And that may also emerge, and there may be some specifically designed vehicles for that. So what I see is that we're going to end up with many different categories of vehicles specifically designed for certain usage. And that's something new because in the past, what we have done is we have taken a car that was essentially designed for a private person, and we now are applying it to these other categories that it wasn't really specifically designed for. So, ride hailing is an example where it's normal passenger cars we're using, but they weren't really designed for ride hailing. Car sharing, we take a car, we put it out and we put it on the street, but that's not really what that car was designed for. So that could be some interesting new segments and also some new areas of automotive design.
So kind of what I'm getting out of this, envisioning in ahead and all that, there's a lot coming together in cars. We probably all can agree that people still are going to like their cars moving forward. This going back to that student that's first wanting to get into the field and all that, what do you think are some other skills beyond learning how to draw and use the programs and all that they're used to 3D model? What are some other skills they should be seeking out that would make it useful for designing the next generation?
Well, first of all, I think you have to recognize that I think design, to be a designer, is a car designer. It's a skill, I would almost say like singing or becoming a painter. There's a certain creative aspects, and either you have some ability in that area or you don't. So I know, for instance, no matter how much I practice, I will never become a singer. So, there is certain things where you must realize, is this really for me? Do I have the fundamental skill inside me? And some people may see once they try it that they don't. And I think part of that skill is sort of a something you truly cannot learn. And that is just to have the feeling for generally aesthetics and design and how things should come together to become aesthetically pleasant and pleasing or amazing. So that skill you need to have. It's like having the fundamental skill of singing or the fundamental skill of painting, whatever it might be. So you got to have that skill. Now, I believe, though, that skill can be improved to become excellent, and it's going to ultimately be part of how you become a phenomenal designer. And that skill you can obviously hone and work on. And the way you do that is what I said earlier. You got to go out and you got to look at all different type of vehicles, try to understand why they are the way they are. You have to kind of start understanding what is a beautiful sculpture, a beautiful line, a beautiful proportion versus what is not. And why is that? And yes, everybody has a different opinion, but there are certain vehicles that most people, whether they like cars or not, you put that vehicle in front of them and a majority of people will say, that's a good looking vehicle. An example of that would be the Jaguar E-Type. It keeps coming up, or the Ferrari 275 GTB. Those are two vehicles that you can put them in front of any vehicle, any person, no matter if they're interested at all or not in cars. Most of them will turn around and take a second look at those cars. So they have a fundamental beauty, and is not just attributed to one thing. It's the perfect mix of proportions, sculpture, and graphics. And that's something that you need to start understanding if you want to be a car designer. And by the way, it's not only in cars, it's also in architecture and product design. So I think that to be a great designer, you should go out and explore not only vehicles, but all design. So you should also look at product design, because product design is having more and more influence into cars, specifically in the interior. Obviously, we have already seen that the way digital smartphones, iPads, whatever it might be, that's have a big impact into our interior design, because now everybody wants their interior to be more like when you're sitting at home working on your iPad or your smartphone. So therefore, you must understand what's going on in the world when it comes to product design. Finally, I do think having global cultural understanding is very important. You must follow what's going on globally in the news with societies around the world. We're seeing that, electric vehicles didn't just come about because they had a lot of torque and they were fast in acceleration. They came about because there was a fundamental shift in the culture around the world where people, they want to do something to get a cleaner environment. They want to do something to improve the health in our cities where we have a lot of pollution. And so those are the things you need to understand, what's happening around the world. And with that understanding also comes the understanding of why people are driving tiny cars in Europe. Why are people driving certain cars, for instance, in Asia, in China specifically? Or why are people here in the US and the Midwest, why are they driving giant pickup trucks? You must have those fundamental understandings, because you can't just dismiss it and say, well, everybody should be driving this type of car. On a piece of paper, the minivan is the most sensible car in the world, but it's also the least desirable vehicle in the world. Nobody wakes up in the morning dreaming about a minivan, or dreaming they one day want to go out and buy a minivan. I never met anybody. Maybe there exists a handful of people, but so we must understand what it is that drives people to buy certain type of vehicles.
Okay, so you are the designer of some of the most beautiful cars of the past decade or so. I got to ask you, as we're getting ready to close here, you got a favorite design, favorite car?
Well, you always, as a car designer, at least in my case, my favorite car is always the last design that I made, because, otherwise, what the heck am I doing? Why didn't I do what is my favorite? So if I leave out my own designs, I would say there is, of course, some classic vehicles like the two I just mentioned, the Jaguar E-Type, the Ferrari 275 GTO, two amazing, beautiful cars. But there's also some cars that still today I remember had a huge impact on my on myself and what I thought about cars. I mean, the Lamborghini Countach had a huge impact on what I thought about amazing supercars. But if I fast forward till today, there's also today some amazing good car designs out there, despite all the rules and regulations. I think the latest iteration of the Porsche 911 is not as a radical futuristic design, but as perhaps one of the best developed designs today in terms of every single area on this vehicle. You can truly see has been given so much attention to perfect proportions, perfect surfacing on that vehicle. It probably has one of the best surface qualities of any vehicle on the road today. The graphics are perfectly integrated. And I think that's kind of, this vehicle will definitely become a classic. It'll be in the Petersen Museum in 25 years because it's so perfectly done. There's been so much attention to the design of this vehicle. So that is, for me, a vehicle that I think today looks amazingly good as a new vehicle. Generally today, I feel too many vehicles have too many creases and too much details on them. I think hopefully we'll get back to a slightly more simple, organic, nice sculptured design. That's something we're working on. And the challenge I had when I did the Fisker Ocean was specifically on an SUV, which is not really known for being super sexy, cool sculptural designs. But for me, it was important to try and figure out how can I create something modern and simple and not like letting myself getting drawn in to making all these creases on the vehicle. It's difficult, and it's difficult when the proportions are not your typical sports car.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I think given a lot of inspiration to all those up-and-coming future designers. I want to thank you, Henrik, so much for taking your time to spend with us, and I wish you well.
It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.